All right, hi everybody. Ken Kirschbaum with Sports Video Group. Glad to be here in Paris. It's been a while for myself, been about 4 years, so it's great to be here, at least today, probably not tomorrow, but today is great. So we're going to talk to two of my favorite topics, which are HDR and 3D audio / spatial audio. Really exciting. I think that the previous panel talking about the World Cup final, what I find great is that that match, which I think in 20 years will only become more special as Mbappe's career continues, and people 30 years from now would look at that was a seminal moment in all of sports. But to have it in HDR with spatial audio, by then hopefully that will be the norm. I think we're getting there quickly. But I wanted to so our goal here, we're going to fit about 2 hours of content into 40 minutes. So really quickly, Christian, I want to start with you as far as from the HBS perspective. Please tell us how Felix and Pablo kind of fit into your HDR, 3D audio plans, but also talk about immersive audio and video in general.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. My name is Christian from HBS CTO, and I'm glad that we can build a bridge between the editorial and the technical, because we are a little bit the annoying kids. Normally, the editorial people, they transport the emotion of the game. This is what it's about. But I have two very empathetic people here in the technical team who are about quality, and we are in the fortunate position at these events that we really can focus on quality. So we introduced audio QCR, HDR QCR, we introduced LED board calibration, color calibration. We, with Felix together, we developed a kick, which is now a standard around these big events, having tracking data, doing automated ball kicks. We had salsa sound, doing some connected ball data using to trigger some sample ball kicks, which is not a product yet, but was a very interesting side project. So we have, in these events, we have the time to focus on things which you, in normal football leagues, you may not have the possibility to do that. And I don't want to waste Felix's time, because he will now bombard you with all the immersion around the projects we've done over time. We did our first remote audio mixing in 2006. At that time, we already had a synchronous audio matrix across the country in ATM. We all moved that to IP, which is today not the topic, for God's sake, because this is about emotion and football. And over to you, Felix, to give the audience a little bit of the background information where we spend our time with when we talk about sound.
Yeah,
Felix,
thank you very
Felix,
much.
I'll help keep you on time. About 18 minutes, just so you know. So.
18 minutes. I try to push it. Yeah, thank you very much for speaking here. When I was asked to speak about immersive audio, I asked myself, what does it actually mean to be immersed? I mean, you are perhaps encompassed by water, or you are in a beautiful scenery like in a forest where you have these beautiful trees and the birds around you. This is immersion as well. Or you are at a party or at a rock concert where you are immersed by the audio, by everything which is happening there. What does immersion mean for us in a sports show, in a football show? If you look into Wikipedia actually defines immersion for film that this is the push of the boundaries that's with actually tactile feedback when people are immersed, when actually the boundaries of real life are reached. If you look into sports, immersion in a stadium, whenever you go into a stadium, in a football stadium, especially for something like a World Cup with the opening ceremony, you are immersed by the pure sound pressure level. I mean, it's 100 dB plus you typically have in a stadium. Nobody would listen to football at home with the sound pressure level. You are immersed by perhaps the architecture or by the scenery which is happening. Whenever you have been in the stadium, I always get goosebumps during the anthems for whatever the English and the German team. Yeah, unfortunately, the Germans didn't go through it properly. Or the Brazilians, the Portuguese teams, they have wonderful anthems. Or you are immersed by the people next to you, drinking beer or sharing a sausage during halftime. So there's a lot of immersion which takes place in the stadium, which you wouldn't have at home. So what can we do? What does it mean, immersion, for us in audio? I mean, in audio, immersion more or less is a buzzword for audio is coming from all over the place. Yeah, it's coming from front, back, top, down, left, and right. But what does it mean actually for us with the development we did the last years? Christian mentioned already The first World Cup, which was fully produced in 5.1, was back in 2006 for the German World Cup. At this time already remotely mixed from the IBC in Munich. It was a quite classic approach with more or less crowds surrounding you from everywhere. There was crowd in all speakers with the added topics like ball kicks and cameras and PA. After the World Cup, Christian asked me to support him with the production plan and with mixing guidelines, and we made our minds up what is actually missing. What do we miss when we compare the immersion we have in the stadium to what we have at home? And it is one point which you clearly identify is that there is a clear fan spot on the left-hand side and a clear fan spot on the right-hand side. And especially in leagues, but also for the World Cups, it's the main supporters of whatever the Portuguese and the Brazilian teams in each corners. So we thought about this, and I actually have chosen an approach which I know from choir recordings, where you put a microphone in front of a choir and you can get all the 5 different parts of this choir, like the sopranos, the altos, tenors, and the basses. And we did the same with the big choir we have actually in a stadium. 50, 80,000 people are the huge choir for our fans at home. And we extroverted this. I typically put these fans, not like when you are in the best seat in the house in a football stadium, your fans left and right and they are more or less like 45 degrees in front of you. We accelerated this and put this to 90 degrees left and right with clear localization. What's the trick actually we are using there? It's a trick which is also known from film. Whenever you put a single source in one speaker, even that you are outside of the sweet spot in this room, everybody would localize this signal from the left speaker or for the other fans from the right speaker. In surround, we had the beauty that you don't have just one speaker, you have 2 speakers for the left fans and for the right fans, and this makes just this choir much, much bigger than it typically is when you just use mono. So the complete next tournaments, 2008 it was in Vienna, right? For the Austrian and Swiss Euro Cup, and 2010 in South Africa was mixed with this philosophy and was a great success. And of course we added again ball kicks, cameras, and PA in the front, and it was refined after this tournament over the years with new technology, with more consistent production plans and mixing guidelines for the audio people as well as for the QC guys. Then we thought, what is actually the next step? What can we improve? And then in 2013, HBS started to do tests with UHD and with 3D audio in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. And again, the approach was, we put some more, I always say crowd sound is kind of noise sound. We put this into the high speakers. That was quite boring because it just sold more or less the speakers. There's some audio on these channels. We made our mind up again, and how can we fill these channels with content which gives us more immersion? We created this microphone. At this time it was called a Helix, actually a Felix Helix by our friends Mick Dwyer and Simon Foster. It's very simple. It was the microphone we used already for the main microphone in surround, and we just added another 4 microphones, turned it around and put it into the stadium. Very quickly, there was a new microphone, a prototype which we used in 2014, at this time so-called ORTF 3D, still with a lot of difference between the main and the height layer, and put in the stadium in Brazil, in Rio, and did a recording for the final, which was at this time post-mixed in Wooden Bassett for some demonstrations and to try out how all the elements in 3D work together. The next year, actually in 2015, we did some tests for the workflow and for signal contribution during the Women's World Cup in Vancouver with the new microphone. Until 2018, Sheps and a researcher from the UK did a great job because they found out we had a quite naive approach. How do men actually perceive height? We don't need the spacing in between the microphones. We thought it's the same principle like left and right, but the researchers found out you don't need the spacing. They built a more compact and outdoor robust microphone, the ORTF 3D. So done. 8 microphones going into 8 speakers, actually quite straightforward. Again, filled with the important elements with ball kicks, cameras, PA, upmixed PA. Talking about ball kicks, Christian mentioned already, in 2018 we introduced for the World Cup as well a software which is called Kick, which is doing automated ball kick mixing. Of course, one huge advantage is the sound supervisor, they don't have to push anymore the faders, which is good for us because we can concentrate on different things like balancing between the crowd, music, and everything which is going on, commentary. The second huge advantage is you create with this software an object which is completely leveled, which is perfectly leveled, much better than man ever could do. Talking about objects. Object is the next huge topic when you talk about next generation audio. We made our mind up what else actually can happen. Which other situation do we have for our audience? Of course, it's at home, but it's also in a pub, in a public viewing area. And with the beauty of next generation audio, we have another 6 objects in live production we can use for a different mix, for a so-called different presentation. We tried out what do they need actually, and what do they have already. They have already a crowd surrounding them. They have already beer drinking together with them. They have already the special smell in a pub. But what they don't have is very clear and easy to understand ball kicks, very clear and easy to understand music for the anthems like PA, and of course the cameras. So we made our mind up, created these objects with fan left, fan right, clear ball kicks with the help of this kick software, and of course cameras, PA, etc., etc. And everything actually in mono. This complete presentation is more or less a stereo presentation with different objects. Why? Because the immersion is coming from the pub itself.
Yeah, and at that time we created it, there was no use case. So
there was no use
there
case.
was nobody using it, so we had a great idea, but nobody used it. And in this World Cup, there was one FIFA sponsor came to us and said they have this idea of an immersive fan festival, and we said like, yeah, we have something for you. And it was implemented across the globe in all fan zones of this specific sponsor, and it was a great success because it gave the people on site and the PA the possibilities to create a much better immersive situation than any 5.1 or any stereo mix could do, because they could customize it to the environment there. So this is an example of how objects can be used very efficiently to create immersion without being 5.1.4.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. That was a huge success to try it out in 2018, and then in 2022 it was already live. After 2018, we thought there still has to be something. There has to be something more. We have now the 3D audio, but still the high perception is difficult to get, difficult to sell to people at home, and we have to sell our product in the end. We made our mind up and had a very nice idea. We introduced spot mics with high perception. I did a research project at the university. Students set up these microphones, at this time quite complicated. Did a recording doing a Bundesliga match in Stuttgart in 2019, and the result was so overwhelming. It was so beautiful to have clear and easy to localize fans. If you think about Dortmund, this huge stand on the left-hand side with 20,000 people, 20,000 fans there, you have, of course, a clear height localization. This microphone again was industrialized and was used in all 10 stadiums during the Euro Cup. For the fan corner left and fan corner right, you see this little iPhone video here, how we position it and how it's pointing towards the fans. All this was then implemented into the production plan for the World Cup last year. We had 16 picture microphones, 20 crowd microphones, so 3 of these microphones were used around the stadium to create this fully immersive sound of the stadium, plus of course the main microphone. More than 40 camera microphones, a lot of them in stereo, in total plus 80 microphones and a lot of stems to create the objects, to create the presentations, to be prepared for all these different presentations. That was fully immersive. And it was so immersive that a friend of mine, Junker Klee from Huddersfield, who is actually a researcher for this spacing theory behind the OTFs, he told me, and I sent him a binaural stream on headphones back home. He was watching whatever English TV during the World Cup. Felix, your audio is so immersive that it's bigger than what I see on the flat screen, and it doesn't fit with the kids left and right to me. And I thought, wow, we are bigger than the picture. Yeah, immersive now in the audio is bigger.
We don't do 3D video anymore.
No, I didn't mean 3D video. I meant 3D audio. And this is an alarm. I mean, it has to fit together. The audio and the video has to fit together. We shouldn't be bigger than the video. And for me, the consequence is you have to have the right tools to balance this right. If you think about cinema control rooms, they go in huge control rooms, bigger sometimes than this room here, to mix properly the little details for a high-value movie. And for a World Cup, we want to go into the truck, yeah, which technically can do the 3D mix, but you don't have the right speaker layout, you don't have the size, the measured room, and of course you don't have and you have the distraction in the truck, yeah, the acoustic distraction by comms, whatever is going on. We are doing this remotely already for a long time, exactly for this reason: have less distraction, have the possibility to concentrate 100% on the audio mix, and to have consistency across 64 matches from the first match down to the final. We have been this year, we have been 3 sound supervisors, sound directors for the Immersive, and it's of course much easier whenever something changes, when something happens, when we discuss how we approach the mix. It's quite easy to balance this, to discuss this, to do a kind of daily briefing in the IBC to get a consistent mix across all 64 matches.
So Felix, do you need a second, or how do you see the role of submixers, or is there a third submixer who gets involved? How does that kind of come together?
How do you mean this?
The production team. So you have the main mixer who integrates the audio effects plus the announcers, and then there's a submixer who usually kind of handles a lot of the...
Yeah, we still have people at the venues, and there's always a team effort between the sound supervisor on site, and for the World Cup, they are, let's say, only do the stereo mix, but they are also the relay with the director. I think having no sound guy attached to the director is not possible. So if the director is still at the venue, he needs a sidekick from the audio side. So we use this person as the relay. He also does the balanced stereo mix, and we put all the multi-channel audio back into the IBC. But we see still there's a need, wherever the director sits, that you have to have an audio person attached to it. Or you need to create the immersion between the two with the cameras, whatever. But we think still when the director sits at the venue, you have to also have an audio guy, although he might not be the one in charge of the complex mixing.
Yeah. They actually produce
3 minutes left, Felix.
They actually produce the stems. Another reason I think is of high value for remote production is with Dolby Atmos now, with 3D audio. You have a lot of more feeds you have to monitor. It's not anymore just surround and stereo. It's 3D, it's surround, it's stereo in different presentations, like with commentary, without commentary, commentary in different languages, and again, all these different presentations in different formats for different home consumer systems, even going down to binaural home consuming. And of course, the new PUB, or at this time called the public viewing presentation, which you have to monitor, which you have to cycle through all the time. Another beauty of of last year was, of course, the huge IP network. And why is it so important for us to have all these tools in the IBC? Because you can make your mind up to create different immersion, to create a new immersion when you have the source at your hand. As an example, I were using the bench microphones, which are typically just for a dedicated program. I were using them to put somehow the audience not anymore to the best seat in the house, actually to put them to the center of the middle line, pushing the microphones, the bench microphones in the rear, actually. Yeah? So you had the scenery in front of you, the crowd surrounding you, and whenever the coaches, of course, we have to be very careful because of offensive language with the teams left and right, but whenever this suited well, they were standing behind you. So you are, as an audience, more or less the fourth referee, yeah, standing at a very perfect position. Yeah, for me, if you see the essence of immersion, it's not just 3D audio, it's everything which comes together. It's perfect objects, perfect handcrafted objects, perfect automated objects, and of course consistency and the variety which you create with the different presentations and the different angles. I think is what makes the audio immersive from my point of view nowadays.
Excellent, that's great. Okay, we're going to shift gears to HDR land, where hopefully, now clearly your friend at home didn't have HDR, because they would have said that the audio and the video both matched. But
they do
yeah.
have HDR in their rooms.
Yeah.
We are really lucky being just
I have HDR on this thing.
door to door with Felix, and actually it's really nice to see them on the room.
And the iPad Pros, all their little phones have HDR. So HDR is a lot more places than we think. So Pablo, why don't you roll us through or Christian, why don't you start us off as far as the HDR philosophy?
So now you're challenged. He did it in 20 minutes. Yeah, when it comes to HDR, a similar story like with audio. We started this in 2015, I think. After Russia, we had our first meetings around. After Brazil, we had our first meeting, and we were talking about BT 2020 and 709, and nobody knew what that was. So everybody was like, eh? And then Pablo came on board, coming from a cinema background, and then he did us a speech, and we were like, huh? So that was the process where HDR entered broadcast, and where everybody had to relearn what color science is, and what a color pipeline is, and what conversion is. And this is when Pablo came to the, let's call it the broadcast world, because your world before was more the movie world. So there was a learning curve bringing these creative people out of the movie world into football. And when the first time he was dealing with normal shaders, it was like, huh, what are you doing here? This is not right. Yeah. So it was a learning curve for Pablo to go into that world, and the other way around. So I think over the years, when we started in 2018, we had this dual layer workflow, which was very complex because you couldn't depreciate or make a compromise on the SDR, because still now most of our clients take the SDR, so there can't be a compromise on the SDR. And then at that time, it was only possible to make dual layer and then to have maybe a compromise on the HDR. We still had a very good picture quality in 2018 with some drawbacks, with the RF cameras being in 8-bit only, the replays being up-converted, and whenever you do up-down conversion, that information gets lost. So one of the things is, when we started our discussions about 22, was we need a single master workflow, 10-bit, and everything downstream needs to be derived from that. And now, over to you, Pablo.
Thank you.
Tell them how that works.
Okay, so as Christian said, what we were doing back in, actually our first test was 2016 when we met. I used to work at Sony back in the day for Cine Alta, so I was a colorist for them, and they wanted to do S-Log 3, so that's how I started doing the demos for them. So this is the plan that was established for this World Cup. This is a dual master, or a dual layer production, extremely complex, extremely extreme workload for everyone, especially for the shaders, because they really need to be doing two pictures at the same time. One operator. We tried the best we could to focus. We weren't even thinking on doing it from the ABC ourselves, but then we hit a bit of a we hit the limit of the network basically, and we couldn't do it. So, and Christian said that I learned a lot. I learned a lot of diplomacy on that World Cup. No, big learning curve, honestly. So, especially for on the shading side, there was a mixture of 10 and 8-bit that can be. It just doesn't work. It was extremely complex in the prep time, because you need to lock the look and feel of one end of the two deliverables, the HDR and the SDR, because you are cross-converting sources and you are matching a lot of sources, so you really need to lock the look and feel, so the creative possibilities are really limited of what you can do. That also happened, and we saw that during the Euros in 2020. It was really hard for the shaders, and I was not the most popular guy in that World Cup, and I understand it, but we did our best. At the end, we ended up being really a strong team, and many of them actually they reach out that I pushed them farther and harder than nobody else has ever done, and that actually they liked it. You see. And I think we created something quite unique. It was the first time ever done in this way, and we did it. After the final, I nearly had a meltdown, but I had to not related. It worked, we did it, and then what's next, as Felix was saying? So the next was, this needs to be more simple. And this is something that, yeah, as I said, I'm going for cinematography, but the simplicity of the workflows of having a single master and then deriving from it the rest of the deliverables, it's a common thing in color management, which is my specialty. This is the classic, well, actually, this is the graphic that we were using for the trainings for the crew in Qatar. But this is an overview of how most of the people is doing it. Most of the broadcasters are doing it. Everything has to be 10-bit, essential. If you have a one single 8-bit source, it's going to sacrifice the whole thing. I mean, if it's something that is just 2 seconds on air, okay, you can live without. But
so wait, can you read? There's small little circles there next to
that's
camera.
the,
So let's go to the left. So do we start on the left here?
The essence of it, basically, you have a camera and you take only the HDR output. You don't take the HDR and you shade on the SDR output because they're interlocked. So you have one HLG or OATF across the board. You don't mix OATFs. And then you have conversion for the shaders to do the closed loop shading. And also your replays and everything you do is in HDR with the same OATF. And then at the output, you do one conversion downstream.
for distribution.
For distribution.
Those little kind of boxes with squares, those are the conversion points. And as Kristen said, we just based UHD HDR is our master. And from there, we will convert or create the...
So you're beyond the days of debating whether SDR is the master. This is the way to go forward, you recommend?
SDR is the main deliverable, but
it's not the master.
it's easier to destroy than to create.
Right.
So when you're coming from wide dynamic range, wide color gamut and high dynamic range, it's easier to convert.
Maybe move forward because basically what we say, your LUT needs to match your HDR master in order to transport the HDR look into the SDR. So the SDR is the reference. You cannot avoid that, but there's different methods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the methods is a topic we were gonna get into it. So this becomes a lot more simple, especially for the shaders. They just focus in one single picture, even though that they are still shading in SDR, but with a predictive or with good conversion, they can be doing adjustments on the HDR without actually having to see it. But it is very important what we call, or what we're starting to call the indirect display referred. And I did promise myself not to try to get too technical, but this is, I've been working for content creators, from storytellers, and my job is to give them the tools to do their job and get all the technicalities aside, but this is how the creative intent is happening. A shader is looking at an SDR, but the input, it's done on the HDR. And this is going to lead into the different methods of conversion, which is probably one of the biggest topics now in the broadcast environment in terms of workflows, because there are different methods to convert from HDR to SDR, which, by the way, they are all correct. There's no right or wrong in here. It's the way it is. So, conversion methodologies. These are the two standardized methods to convert. This is actually an HDR to SDR conversion. One is using a gamma compensated, and the other one is using a more linear approach. As I said, these are both on ITU recommendations. As I said, in color science, there's no right or wrong. Both are correct. But what we end up with a lot of research and development and so on, is that the most important thing is that the SDR is uncompromised in both. The result is nearly the same, or practically the same. Really hard to tell which SDR or which method has been used, because the shaders are using memory colors, it's called, and they're using technical monitoring or waveform monitors, the way they've always done it in SDR. So they were going to expose, they're going to plug the saturation, they're going to create the picture they've always done before. But the result in HDR, that's a different picture, right, by using one method or the other one.
How would you, so I'm looking at the two differences there. Obviously, to me, the green blob on the right is a little higher than the green
maybe
blob on the
I
left.
explain it.
What does that
because
mean in
when
terms of a
Pablo
picture?
Pablo explains it, nobody understands it. So
What
on
does
the
that mean?
left side,
What does that sort of mean in general terms?
no, on the left side, you see the two methods in HLG, and basically what you see is the waveform, and you see the difference in exposure. The big block is the grass, and there's a ITU recommendation how to expose grass. There's a variation from 45 to 51%.
Yeah, about 45 to 50 to
And
60 nearly.
when you see on the right side, after the conversion, the SDR exposure is exactly
Very
the
similar,
same. But on the two methods, on method 2, which is the NBC,
I've tried not
Approach.
to name anyone.
I can. You get a more exposed, more dynamic picture, which HDR is about. So within the given specification of the BT 2008 guide, 2408 guideline, you can see that two methods differ. On the SDR side, they're giving the same exposure. On the HDR side, you use more of the dynamic range. You get a more punchy, more.
So this debate has been going on at EBU for quite some time. I was invited to try to participate and to say, well, what's the right or wrong of one and the other? And I ended up just showing them this. There's no right or wrong. It's about what picture do we want for our audiences. It's about the creative intent, which is the reason why we decided to, together with Christian and his team, to go for one method of conversion. Basically, the methodology is, as HDR is this is my methodology, the way that I approach. I listen to the content creators, to my client, what picture do you want? And then I make it happen that the SDR follows, and it's the SDR everybody expects. But I show them, I start from the HDR. That's our master. That's the picture where we're going to derive everything. And that's the future. I mean, HDR is here. It's SDR eventually will disappear at some point, and we will stay on an HDR world. So we are now establishing what is the look of the future. It's a really pivoting point on the industry. So I show them many different options, what picture you want, and then we just create the conversion. We apply the ITU maths and so on to create the picture that we want. We created we ended up creating our own code because there was nothing in the market that could give us the flexibility and the tonality that I'm a colorist, so I'm super picky with how things are tone mapped and gamut mapped and so on. So I ended up working with a color scientist to create our own algorithm, which now has become an actual product. Never intended to, but here it is. And then the topic of viewing environments. There's a lot of conversation if it's 100 needs the correct one, if it's 200 needs the correct one. In all honesty, it doesn't matter.
For SDR.
For SDR. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be exposing for a waveform. They're going to be using memory colors, it's called. I did the test on the Arab Cup on 2021. I had all the shaders with me, and from one day to the next one, I just recalibrated all their monitors for 200 nits. Nobody realized. Only one of them said that it was more tired at the end of the day, which makes total sense in a way, because you're looking at a really tiny display for a long time, and that was it. The exposure of the match was exactly the same one as the previous day. The other thing is when you have viewing environments where you combined HDR and SDR, there is no standardization for that. And that's where we need to get into an agreement of when you have, which anyway, nobody at home has it, HDR and SDR side by side. And it's a thing that I would strongly recommend not to do it too often or to keep it in a very specific area like we do on our QC. And in our QC, we just go as crazy as we go to the most crazy environments that we can get. We get laptop, which is average. Laptops are about 400 nits in SDR. Consumer TVs. We get the cheaper option of the HDR consumer TVs. Then we have in our desk the 30,000 plus 5 monitors for reference. Those are our reference master monitors. But we try to see the picture in the worst scenario and in the best scenario.
Yeah, and this is important to say because there's also studies at the moment around peak white luminance of displays with 10% pixel widths and then with full pixel widths. And if you compare older TVs with newer TVs, you go up to 1300 nits. And so there's a lot of dynamic happening in consumer displays as well. So we try to give the whole viewing environment situation in this room. But our main focus is on the SDR deliverable, which is the one where the HDR look is transported transparently from HDR to SDR. And this is the LUT, which was the FIFA LUT, which is very close to a other LUT, which is an industry standard, so to say, which was used for the World Cup.
Right. Well, I guess one of the challenges here for both the audio side and the video side is, once you start going down the rabbit hole of the consumer experience and what they're getting at home, you'll probably go insane because there's the cable systems that can screw things up. There's the compression that takes place. There's the wide variety of TV sets. So I guess in general, you really kind of have to figure out a philosophy for you. Don't worry about what happens because you'll just go crazy between all the OTT platforms, right? I mean,
yeah, that's also an interesting experience of sometimes getting text messages of, hey, what is going on? It's not looking like that. Talk to your broadcaster. I mean, here, the signal we're producing is...
No, but you need that feedback.
Yeah,
so
right.
I have people who, they watch at BBC or somewhere in the world and say, it looks great today. Or Felix gets the guys in Germany and said like, today it's really immersive. Or we get even emails from people. So this kind of feedback, how it really turns out at the consumer end is the most important, because if what we produce doesn't translate back home, it's useless. Okay. And this is very important, and I think this is one of the things where HDR really needs to evolve to make the quality arrive at the consumer end. We educate the broadcasters, we get the feedback, but it's also the gremiums, we train the people, we try to also sensibilize the people for the problems we are facing in this domain.
Right, but of course this is why you need more people getting on board this train and delivering, because obviously if there's only one or two content providers, it's like the 3D thing. If there's only ESPN doing 3D, then there's not a lot of push for the cable operators to figure that out and do it in a proper way. So, which never happened, and then we saw what happened with 3D. I guess one thing I've seen with HDR, I guess with audio as well, is that things are, from the outside, if you've never done it, it looks very daunting because a lot of your perception is based on 3 years ago, 4 years ago, what you heard. So a lot of people then checked out and said, well, I'll wait till this thing becomes easier. Let's take HDR. Yeah. It seems, so when I talk to Fox Sports, I'm like, well, you're doing HDR for college basketball. That's got to be complicated. Tell me what's going on. They're like, no, it's not really. We just flip some switches and that's it. And so walk through that as far as how much simpler things have become for those who haven't attempted HDR or 3D audio for that matter.
Yeah, I think one thing was what has happened, that conversion technology evolved a lot. So what was very complicated 4 years ago, you now have a variety of boxes where you can load a LUT and whatever. So also the awareness of, that looks odd, it's HDR, to adapt to the new world, so to say. There's also a learning curve. And
graphics was also a big learning curve, and this World Cup was the interaction of old ENG and editorial, which we were doing also in HDR, and that still needs a bit of...
That was maybe one of the most to improve, training the post-pro side of things, the editors getting comfortable when they do color corrections, to have a feature set. And within the HDR, we didn't find a proper workflow that the editor sees what he gets. So that is a lot of things.
There's quite a limitations on the edit system that we were using at the moment.
Right.
So it's once again, it's the workflows.
Right.
We're starting to get that.
So we have about 30 seconds left. So
just very quickly on the audio side, I think the biggest problem we have in audio to get it through to the home consumer is actually, we need the commentary. We need to have somebody who is telling the story. I never watch a football match when I mix without commentary. It's just boring. but they are typically in the stadium. There's a lot of spill, and I call it the spill ratio, commentary spill ratio, as well as the commentary IS ratio. Varies depending on who is in the master control room, who is sitting in front of the mixing console. Sometimes we don't hear our sound anymore at all, depending on the network, who is taking our stuff. This needs somehow a measurement thing that we have a more objective perspective to it. Whatever the ESPN sports sound is like, effects has the same level like the commentary, and better tools actually to get the spill reduced in the stadium.
But we also tried some stuff with the AI stuff which can reduce the spill.
There's hope with AI.
There's hope.
Yeah, there's hope.
I know Heather's coming back up on the stage, and I guess Felix, in a couple weeks, you're going to be doing a deeper dive.
Yes, a deeper dive
And
with
I will say
audio.
that in both SVG and SVG Europe, we're committed to having conversations around this. We're doing a two-hour seminar with you at NAB. This is really two important topics to really kind of take the viewing experience to the next level and make it competitive with Netflix and Amazon Prime and a lot of those folks. So
well, that
was
was
great.
4 slides after this, but the look, we've been listening about the cinematic use of cameras and more depth of field and different lenses and so on. The next step is actually the look of the picture. It's doable. You have the dynamic range, and it can be transferred into SDR. So we are already working on the tools, etc., to give content creators the tools of how you really want to look, make this to look like, not being manufacturer dependent. You have the Sony look of the Grass Valley look, to give them the right and the ownership of, okay, this is your look.
That's great, excellent. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Heather, come on down.